When you're making a single page web application and each page is its own file, they're kind of isolated and it's hard for them to communicate. In this video, we're going to cover a pattern that I use when I want to connect pages together, whether that's data or other information, maybe a signed in user, something like that. So I'm going to show you the pattern I use, and we're also going to introduce a new type called effect to our program that's going to make our apps really concise and really easy to work with. And then, as we'll see later, more testable. Let's dive into it and let's have some fun. All right, let's take a look at where we left off. So in the previous video, we created a dashboard page and a counter page, and it kind of looks like this. Our app has a to-dashboard link that changes to the top level URL, has a to-counter link, and each of these are individual init, update, subscription, view functions that live in their own file. So we're able to think about each page independently without having to look at the whole application all at once. So our dashboard is kind of simple, and we can take this pattern and we can kind of scale it. If we wanted to add like a sign-in page, we would just have to change this to sign in, and then maybe we'd want to change what we're showing the user. So sign in, and then things are starting to get unwieldy here with adding all these links. Why don't we have our sign-in page use a header component? Let's take this header component from before, and let's add in all the links that we care about. So this was sitting around from a previous video when we were talking about how to add components. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to make, this is the dashboard. This is going to be the counter. So we're going to have these links go to different pages in our app. So I copy paste the dashboard. I made this sign-in page. If we want to connect it to our application, first we can make a route here. We can say there's a sign-in route, and it's going to be available when the URL path is sign-in. So we can get set up here. And then what's cool about adding that route is Elm's going to tell us, hey, what do I do when the route is sign in? Like, oh, that's a good point. I need to add that sign-in page to our main application. So I'm just going to kind of follow the pattern that we defined in the last video. And I'm just gonna, be as dumb as possible. I'm just gonna follow the shapes of everything. There's not too much thought that I need to really put in this one because everything's so consistent here. So sign in, not counter, but sign in, not counter, but sign in, not counter, but sign in, and not counter, but sign in. So it was a bit of typing, but we got there. And what's interesting is it doesn't know what the pages.signin model is because we didn't import pages.signin. So I'm going to do that. Now it's like, what is this sign-in message you're talking about? That's a good question. So I'm really just following the Elm compiler and letting it guide me through this refactor process. So as I add a new feature, the Elm compiler is just going to highlight all the places I need to go. So I can just freely talk to you as I record this video and use about 2 brain cells just following the squiggly lines. It is a very good feeling once you have an Elm code base because it really has your back when it comes to adding new features. So that's why I love to use it. Cool. We're going to do the exact same thing, but instead of sub.map, we're going to use that document map function we made in the last video, and we're going to use the sign-in view. And then there's just one thing that's not going to get caught here, and that is this. And so this is kind of a gotcha. The way we use this pattern, we said we have this underscore case, and this underscore case is going to prevent Elm from being able to tell us about new variations. So what I want to do instead of using this underscore case is I'm going to explicitly say for each message, and if you're writing this by hand, if you're doing it the way that I'm doing in this video, I really recommend doing this. Every time you add a new page, even though it's repetitive, I really encourage you to create a route for every single page that you create that's just going to do this for us. Rather than have one underscore route at the bottom, make sure to match on that page, because when you add a new page, you're going to get an error message that looks like this. And this is going to help prevent bugs that are really annoying, where you add a new page and it didn't tell you that you need to handle a sign-in message. So let the Elm compiler help you. Be as explicit as you can. And that would have saved me a bit of time there. So counter, sign in. Just a pro tip for you. All right, sign in. We're just replacing all these. And I'm trying to do it case sensitive. That's why I'm like doing this awkward, selecting the lowercase ones and then selecting the uppercase ones. And then we're gonna have just one more handler for sign in. And now when I add a page in the future, it's gonna highlight the update function for me and remind me that I do need to handle any updates that come from the sign in page. But that's it. Now that my app compiles, I feel pretty good that things are gonna work as I expect. So I'm gonna refresh this. And now I'm in the dashboard, back to the counter. What I wanna do is I wanna use this header on every page so that it's really easy for me to click links between these different files. So I'm gonna zoom in a bit, and I'm just gonna import components header on each of my pages, and we're gonna reuse that navbar component, that header component, rather than having to hard code these links every time, because it's starting to become a drag. I'm getting bored. So I'm just gonna kind of copy this snippet, save that, and then I'm gonna paste this snippet, and I'm going to do this. It's gonna be like, what is components.header? It's a good question. Reading ID, what are you talking about? Oh, there we go. So there's our header. Looks like the links aren't clustered together the way that I want. And that's just a matter of adding some gap between them and not doing justify content space between for every item. So I'm just going to do one rem for all these. And that's just going to be a bit of CSS that we're going to add. We can add this in our actual CSS file. When we first made these components, we didn't have a CSS file. So that's why everything's kind of weird there. But we could also just use gap instead of space between. But now I've got these links to help me navigate between, but I didn't add them to my sign-in page. So I'm going to make sure that I have that component, that header component available on every page that I want to have a header component. Sign-in might not want that navbar in the long run. So if there's ever a page that you don't want to have the component, just don't add it in. But for our example app, I think it's going to be helpful to be able to click these links and just quickly switch between different things. Cool. So that's it. We added that in. We added a sign-in page. We added a dashboard. We added a counter. But what if there's like a user that we want to share? Like, let's say the sign-in page has a form. Let's add a form to the sign-in page. So I'll do form. On submit, we'll do submitted form. And then I'm going to have an input. Input should have labels. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to add a span. This is just me kind of scaffolding out what I want my form to look like. I can say username. I can say, the value is going to be model.username. And we'll just, we'll leave it there. I'm not going to add a password for this, but you can imagine that if you wanted to have a password field, you would just do something similar. I'll add a password just for you. Password. And then we can even use the type password so that it's going to be, it's going to hide the things with those dots, things that you expect from a password field. And then instead of just having a do nothing message, we'll have a submitted form message. And we want to add username and password to our data model so that we can track those values as they change. So we're going to have the username, we're going to have the password, and this is just on the sign-in page. Notice this is not on the dashboard. This is just the local data model that we care about when we're dealing with the sign-in page. So I'm just going to make a simple form. Oops, I added a comma in the wrong spot. And what I want to do is I also want to have handlers that on input, they call changed, and then whatever that field is. So let's just take this. Changed username, changed password. I give that a capital U, give that a capital P. And then these are messages that'll get fired off whenever someone types into these input fields. So I'm going to say changed username is a message, change password is a message, and they're both going to have access to that string that was available when the user started typing. So here we're going to have the the new value that's coming in, and then here I think we want to just leave the model alone. Here, we're going to save the username equals the new value. And I really miss my keyboard shortcut, that lowercase thing. So I'm going to add that in real time. What was that? That was horrible. It's not what I wanted. Keyboard shortcuts. All right, here we go. Lowercase. Command K, L. Uppercase. K, U. Stole these from Sublime Text. They're very good. Now I can do KL. Boom. It's magic. See how cool that was? All right. And then we're going to do command.none because we don't need to fire off any side effects. We just need to update our state. So here we go. And then there's this ambiguous form import. When we do these exposing everything, sometimes there's a form variable that's an attribute, but is also an HTML node. So this is why generally I don't recommend exposing multiple things. Typically in my applications, I'll do something like this. But for this educational video, I didn't want to have to, scatter all of these with events and stuff like that. So every now and then I'm gonna have to pay the price by being explicit. So if that ever happens to you, if there's like a form exposed from one module and another, you can always fully qualify that import, and it'll let Elm know which one you were hoping to work with. So here I've got this username, I've got this password. What I'm going to do is I'm going to make this a div because I'm a bad person, and that's going to make it a really shortcut way of making these go on two fields. So I can say, Ryan, and the password is, something like that. And what I want to have is a button that's going to say sign in. And now that we've added that, again, I'm a bad developer, so I'm just going to throw random elements in here to format my code for speed. But when I hit sign in, I don't even know what I typed here, 123, 123. When I hit sign in, we're going to get this submitted form message. It's also going to work if I hit enter. But as I was typing, what was happening was Elm was sending those messages. And I love this part of the Elm debugger, especially when you're handling inputs. Being able to watch the values come in is so much fun. So as I typed each letter, these were the events that were firing off. That's why that onInput event was there. It's so that it updates the state of my model. So as you'll see here, when I was typing in ASD, SDA, you can see on the right over here, it was updating my sign-in page model. And it was updating the UI real time. Very cool. Very cool stuff. Anyway, so I hit the submit button and it gave me the ability to sign in. So what that's going to do is it's going to send that event. And then what do I do? How do I get that user so that the dashboard can see it? So what I'm going to recommend that we do here is that we have the notion of like data that we want to share from one page to another. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to create 3 new modules, actually. One, we're going to go into this main.elm file, and there's a bunch of stuff that's being stored internally. So we have the flags, the URL, the key, the page. This is our top level data model that's available under the hood for everything that we do in the app. So anytime we inspect our model, this is what is secretly, it's not so much of a secret to us, but this is what's kind of being stored under the hood. So the question is, what parts of this information are going to be relevant for each page? What should each page know? The page model isn't that important. If you're on the counter, you know you're on the counter. You don't need to be told, oh yeah, by the way, here's the page model. You're yourself. That's not important because you already have access to your model in your update, in your view, in your subscriptions. So we can start by just taking this part here, and let's just kind of copy what we have, and let's make a new file. We're going to call this the context. And the context is something that's going to be shared across every page, no matter where you're at. So context, exposing context. And instead of calling this model, we're going to call this context. And what we're going to do is we are going to say that every page will always have access to the flags, the URL, and the key. And eventually we're going to take the key out because we're not going to need it. But for now, we're going to say URL is from that package, flags. Good thing we extracted it into its own module because it's from there. And then when we do browser.navigation, exposing key, these are the types that the context needs to know about. So the reason I imported these is because we would get an error message if we didn't tell it what key is, what flags are, what URL is. So what I want to do is make sure that every single function in all of our pages have access to this context. And what we're gonna eventually do is have a user that's available on that context. So what I'm gonna do is, let's just define a user type here. We're gonna do this the quick way. And we're not gonna store the username's password in our local state. We're gonna assume that goes to the server and it verifies everything's okay. And we're just gonna have a user, maybe they have a username, an email, an ID for the database later. But we're not gonna worry too much about that. So I'm gonna expose this, and let's say that context always has access to these 3 bits of information, and then eventually we're gonna add user, but not yet. We're not gonna do that quite yet. Okay, so what I want to do is if we go back to main, we need to use the model and create a context from it. So we're gonna make a function from model to context, which is gonna take in the model and return a context. This is gonna be a nice helper method that's gonna allow us to say, just grab these 3 things, and then we're gonna take those off the model and create this kind of more minimal data type that doesn't care about the page. So we're gonna keep that going from model to context. Perfect. Model context doesn't know what context is. That's valid. Oops. And so now that we have the notion or the ability to go from a model to a context, what we're going to do is we're going to say all these pages should have access to that. So instead of just having access to the flags, let's give init access to the full context. And then from there, it can do context.flags, right? Because that's a property that's defined on that type. So here, if you take a look, context has flags. There's no need for us to specify both of them. And we're already seeing errors popping up in main because we're changing what these functions need. And then we're going to pass that context into every function that we care about, just in case the subscriptions depend on some data. Maybe they depend on the URL. Maybe they depend on the signed in user. Maybe if the user's not signed in, we don't want to show anything on the dashboard on the view page. So we want to make sure that context is kind of readily available for everyone that needs it. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy some of these things and paste these in and update some of these signatures. So we're going to do that. This is going to be a little bit tedious, but I am willing to type it if you're willing to watch me type it. So we're going to do this, context. We're going to add these to all of our pages, and that's going to make it so that every single page has access to context. And this is the pattern that we're going to use going forward. So when we create new pages, we can just kind of copy one of these and then again, keep going. And we got to make sure that we import that context type so we can use it in our annotations. Dashboard's got it, counter's got it, and we're going to be incredibly consistent. I think I might have made a mistake in that last one. Did I accidentally leave flags in? I did. So we don't need just flags anymore. Context is going to have that included. And so here you can see we were using flags before. Now we can do context.flags to get that same value. So we're going to do that. boop, context, boop, context. And now everything has access to this application-wide data. So we're going to be able to share information between pages once we figure out how to update that information. So here it's a little bit upset. It doesn't know, it doesn't want model.flags anymore, right? So everywhere we were doing this, now we want to say from model to context. And that is going to take our model, convert that to a context, and we're going to do something really similar down here for these update functions. So update, update, update from model to context. And we're going to give it the context. So every update function is going to get it. I'm going to copy this. Every subscription is going to get it. And now there's a little bit of the global application state that is available to every page in every case that we need it. So if we wanted, we could shorten this too. We could say, to context. So I'm just renaming that function just to make it a little bit more concise. But the high level idea is now every page has access to this stuff. So on the dashboard, if I just wanted to do some a quick test to see if it can see that data, I can say debug.toString, and we can just print out the context on the dashboard. So if I refresh, never for this website, go to the dashboard, you can see that I have access to the flags, I've got access to the key, I've got access to the URL, all that good stuff. And if we decide that we want to add information, like the current user, we're just going to need to update this one function to say that the user is going to be nothing. And then it's going to be up to our sign-in page to be able to update that context and say, hey, you need to be able to update that user. Or we just signed in a user, put that in the global context so that, every other page is going to have access to that. So the way we're going to do this is we're going to introduce a shared module. We're going to do that in the next video, but I want to introduce you to one more type before we wrap things up, and that's going to be the effect type. So command is an incredibly low-level way to send messages. We saw command allowed us to do things like, browser navigation.load, browser.navigation.push. We're going to make an effect type that is really similar to command that's going to allow pages like sign-in to affect our application in a very specific way tailored to our app. So we're going to make a module that looks a lot like the command module, but we're going to be able to send effects like sign in user, and we're going to be able to map an effect with one type of message to an effect of another type. So I'm going to show you this pattern, and I recommend it for every application, where if you need to batch things together, just like command.batch, you can do things like that. So sign in user, maybe you want to have an effect that's like, a change URL. What's cool about making an effect is that you can define what data you care about, and you don't need to get in the low-level weeds. So we can say, change route doesn't care about URLs or navigation keys. It just takes in an actual route type. So we can say route.dashboard, route.counter, instead of having to type those URLs by hand and be afraid of making typos that Elm's not going to catch. So we're going to kind of define our own effect type, and then we're going to have a function that turns this into real commands. And when it performs those commands, we're going to be able to send less weird information like this secret key function thing. We don't need every page to have access to that. It's going to make our application a little bit easier to read and practice, and it's going to make it so we don't need to provide really tedious ways of using some of these core APIs. So that's the high-level motivation here. What I'm doing is I am exposing an effect type. I'm going to expose all the variants. And I'm also going to make little helper functions here that just re-expose the variants with nice annotations so that it feels like you're using command.none, command.batch, things like that. So I'm just going to add nice annotations to all these. And so when you take a list of things, we're going to batch that list of things. You take a sign in user, ask for that username, ask for that string, return an effect, username. This is going to be like the data. And we're going to say sign in user, here's your data. And then same thing with change route. Route, we're going to make an effect from that. So I'm just kind of mimicking what you're seeing here in the custom types, and this is going to make it so that we have these functions. We can even add comments to these functions to help people understand what they do, but it's going to be a little bit nicer than just exposing the variants directly and working from those. So that's what I like to use. Change route. I'm going to change I'm going to change to push. So here we're going to do this, this, and this. I'm just going to lowercase this p. So push route is going to use the push URL with the nav key and all that stuff, and it's just going to ask users to provide a route that needs to happen. So high level, what we're going to do is we are going to import, or IPOO, which is I guess what I wanted to type. Oh, and we need to implement this map function. So map is important. This is going to be creating effects. And this is going to be, the map function, which is going to help us transform effects from one message type to another message type. This is going to be really important because we're going to have effects for pages that we need to upgrade to effects for our entire application. So here we're going to have toMessage, we're going to have an effect, and it's really just going to be a big case pattern. So this is kind of an advanced pattern that might look a little intimidating the first time you see it. But I really recommend using this because it's going to solve that problem that you're going to have with single page applications, which is I need to be able to share data across my page. So hopefully the way I explain this is going to be easy enough for you to implement on your own. So things that don't include this message parameter, you can just return as is. So sign in user, there's no lowercase message anywhere in this type. So you can just return things as is. When it comes to mapping routes, you can return things as is. But because we have this batch function where we have effects and a list of effects that are of type message1, we need to be able to do list.map. And then we need to map, we got to call ourselves with the toMessage function on those effects. So that's the only reason that we really need the map right now. You can also use effects to just send raw commands, but we're not going to do that for our application. We're going to explicitly say all the commands that we need. None when we don't want to do any work. Batch when we want to do multiple effects in one go. And then sign in user and push route are going to be the two effects that are going to be used by the sign in page. And so what I'm getting at is at the very top level, I'm going to put this all the way at the bottom. This is going to be how we turn our custom effect type into the commands that Elm is expecting. So I'm going to have one thing from effect to command that is going to take in a model. It's going to take in an effect, and it's going to turn in, it's going to convert that effect to a command. So I think for now we don't need the model, so I'm going to leave that out. From effect to command, let's say that it's for these capital M messages. So from effect to command takes in an effect, and it's going to look a lot like what we typed here. We're going to have a pattern match, but we're not going to return effects. We're going to return commands this time around. So there's just going to be one place here where we say if we get the none effect, we're going to return command.none. If we get a batch with a list of effects, we are going to command.batch. And then rather than using map, we're going to say from effect to command. So we're going to basically turn all these effects, this list of effects, into a list of commands, and then we're going to batch those commands together. When we want to sign in a user, what we need to do is we need to have some type of message that gets emitted that tells our program. So we need to be able to like send a message that's like, it's going to end up being a command. So I know a secret way to do that. So we can say test.succeed with message, and then we do task.perform identity. And this is just super fancy using the task module to turn a message into a command. So what we can do here is we can say send message sign in user with that data that we cared about. So we need a sign in user message now. Sign in user. I'm going to put it up here. I'm going to, have a context.user be the type. And then just like we did this, what we're going to do is we are going to store the user right here. Maybe a user. And then this is just going to forward whatever is stored on the model. So when we start up our app, let's say that the user is not signed in. And then what we're going to do is whenever we get this sign in user message, no matter what page we're on, we are going to say model user equals just that user. So this is a top level value that we're going to store called sign in user. So we're storing the user in the model, and this is only going to get fired if a page sends this effect. So sign in user is going to send a message, sign in user, and it's going to pass along that user information. And then finally, push route. We learned how to push a route before. We're going to use push URL, and then we're going to want to have access to this model. So we're going to say model.key. This is where I was thinking we want to pass in the model. Push URL is going to take in a model.key, and then we're going to want a way to turn a route to a string. So that's the only thing that we're going to need here. But push URL returns a command. So as you see here, as I do push URL, it takes in a key, it takes in a string, and returns a command. And then all of these, I'm going to fully qualify with effect. So this allows us to pattern match and say for each one of these effects, this is what I actually want you to do under the hood. So from effect to command. Sorry, I forgot about that message type. But this is kind of what our from effect.command is going to do. And then it's just complaining because we don't have a toString defined. I'm going to hop back over to route. And we're just going to make a route to string function that for each route in our application, we're going to tell Elm how we want to turn that into a URL. So case route of we're going to say do this. Lowercase it. Except the dashboard's going to be at the root. Sign-in's going to have a dash in between it. And then for 404, if we ever want to navigate to an outbound page, we can just pick whatever URL we want because anything that's not handled in our app is going to be valid. So we're going to expose this too. So mostly this refactoring has just been me following errors. Like when I forget to import task, that's an error message that I follow. And so my flow for working through these things is just doing that. Oh, and I need to pass in the model. That's right. So when I list that map, I want to keep passing that model through so that when I need the effect message, command message function, it already has the model provided to it. That's what that error was. Okay, cool. Sweet. So I'm going to revisit this context real quick, and I'm going to just get rid of this key. We're not going to use this key anymore. We don't need it because we have this effect type now. And so now what you're seeing is still the dashboard has flags, still has a URL, and it's got this user, but we haven't sent any effects out of our application. So the last step to this video is we're going to upgrade all of our command messages to effect messages. So I'm going to import effect, and now our application isn't going to be working with this low-level API. It's going to be working with this higher level thing that we defined called effects. So rather than saying command.none, we're going to say effect.none. And then here, we're actually going to move these ports into our effect module. So I'm going to move this over here. I'm going to say our effect module is going to be that. We're going to add a save counter port.
Save counter is going to take a value and return an effect. Save counter is going to take in that counter value. And it's going to call it's going to create a new effect called save counter. Save counter. And we just have to do this because we have a port that's being used. Save counter, this is the value. It's okay when we map. We don't need to worry about any message types because value is an int. There's nothing to map there. So I'm going to save this. We don't actually want the port here. Let's put the port over here. So now we're only going to have ports at this top level. This is upset because it doesn't know what to call. Effect.saveCounter. The value, what I want it to call is the save counter port. That's just going to be defined in this one spot. So what this means is rather than saying effect, rather than calling the port directly, we're going to call the save counter port, or the save counter effect, which is going to turn an integer into our custom effect type. And then we don't need this port module anymore. This is great. So counter got upgraded. We're going to do the exact same thing for dashboard. We're going to do the exact same thing for sign in. And then we're going to have all our pages connected, and we're going to have the ability to send data between them. So I'm just going to upgrade those to effects. That's all I need. Import effect. I can't type import. That's the issue. Exposing effect. Cool. So I'm going to do that. Effect. Do effect. So now our pages aren't working with effects, and we just have one more thing that we need to fix, which is that everywhere in our main, we assumed that pages would return commands. Really what we want to do is use, instead of command.map for all of these, we're going to use effect.map. Followed by from effect to command, and we're going to pass in that model. So by adding that to all these instances, I changed all those command maps to effect map, and then I said from effect to command to convert them into commands so that the Elm browser application function was ready to accept them. We have it working. So all I need to do now is when you submit the form, instead of doing nothing, what I can do is I can do two different effects. I can say effect.signinUser. I can provide the username equal to whatever they typed. And then I can say effect.pushRoute, and I can say route.dashboard. So this is going to sign in the user. It's going to change that context that every page has access to. And when I save this, it's just going to be confused about where did you get that username from. And also, please import the route module so that you can use the route.dashboard prefix. So we're on the dashboard. The user is nothing. I'm going to go to the sign-in page. Oops, let me refresh. I'm going to go to the sign-in page here, and I'm going to type in Ryan Haskell and some garbage password. And when I click sign in, I have been redirected to the dashboard because of that effect. And look, we have access to the signed in user. So rather than having that crazy garbage being printed out where it's just debug the whole context, what we can do is we can have a case expression. We can start to write normal code. So we can say if there's no user, we can say no one signed it. And if there is a user, we can say signed in as user.username. I think that'll work. So no one is signed in. Go into the sign in page. I type in Doug and I click sign in. And now I'm signed in as Doug. As I refresh, it's clearing that. It's because I'm not saving the user to local storage. You can imagine we can add an effect for that. So effect sign in user maybe sends out a port to that writes that user to the local storage, that when I refresh my page, I'm not signed out again. But that's it. That's the big idea behind adding in this context type. So we have access to all this stuff, adding an effect type so that we can perform effects at a really high level. We can just say, hey, sign in the user, push the route, and we're not worried about the nitty-gritty details of exactly how that works. We can just handle that in one place. So in that one place in our application, we can say, hey, when a page wants to push a route, do all this annoying stuff. And they don't even need to know about this model.key. And so that's the big idea. That's why I like using the effect pattern. So hopefully that was easy to follow. Feel free to watch the video if that was a lot to take in all at once. But I'll catch you in the next video where we start to dive into some tooling stuff. See you there.